The hardest things to do with Code Interpreter are trying to either read or build things that are bigger than a single chat message. So if you're going to go and try and create some product that requires, generating multiple outputs and then putting them all together into one single final product, or you're going to take one big document that's 100 pages long and can't fit into a single chat message that you send to Code Interpreter, those are the hardest types of things to do in Code Interpreter. And so we're going to go through and talk about how do we tackle problems when they're bigger than what we can do in a simple exchange with Code Interpreter. Now, the first thing we're going to take a look at is how do we deal with big documents? How do we get context out of some big document that's bigger than we can cut and paste into a single chat message? So we earlier looked at examples where we either took unstructured text that could fit into a single text message to the LLM, or we took a lot of structured data that it could write Python code for. But what happens when we need the LLM like ChatGPT or GPT-4 to read and understand a really big document? How do we go about doing that? Well, we have to do it by breaking the document down into individual pieces that will fit into GPT-4 or whatever LLM that we're working with and can be incrementally processed. So how do we go about doing that? So I'm going to give you 3 examples of ways that you can do it, but you can kind of pick your own increment. So in this first example, I've got the enrollment report from Vanderbilt. This total report has about 23 pages. It's more than I can cut and paste into a single message to Code Interpreter. So what do is I take the enrollment report and I ask Code Interpreter to extract each page of the PDF as plain text in a separate file. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to split it up and break it apart into a format that's going to be easier to process. And this is one of the most common simple things that you can do is you can try to take a long document and you can break it up into separate pages and then work with the document a page at a time. So in this case, I start off by breaking the document apart into a PDF. It's a plain text and it has each page as a separate plain text file. And this is really important. When you start breaking documents apart, you want to break them apart into separate files. This is really important when you want to go and refer to specific pages or parts of the file, or you need to incrementally process it. You need to have it able to go and write Python code that can go page by page or file by file, read in the text, and then have GPT-4 do something with it. So then what I'm going to do in this example is I'm going to say open each page and manually summarize what is on each page. And this is where breaking it apart into separate files is really important, because now that I broke it into separate files, Code Interpreter can go and write Python code to read each file individually, but it can also help it get a sense of what files it's processed. So one of the things that we're going to face is we're not only going to have to break the document apart, but we're going to have to help Code Interpreter remember where in this set of pages it is. And if we break it apart into separate files, typically that's easier to do. There's lots of ways that we can get about doing that. Here's another example. This is a little more advanced example in terms of the prompt that I've used to do this. But basically what I've done is I've taken a longer document. It's a paper that I wrote. It's a very dense paper. But rather than breaking it into individual pages, I've asked it to go and process 2,000 characters of the document at a time. So basically 2,000 letters at a time. So I've taken one big extraction of the document into a big thing of text, and then I'm going and looking at the first 2,000 characters, then the next 2,000 characters, and the next 2,000 characters. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish, one way may work better than another way. You could also do it as 10,000 characters or 15,000 characters. But kind of thinking about one thing that's important to think about is if you are breaking it apart into a page, the unit of summarization is going to be a page. The unit of outline is going to be a page. So if you want it to summarize less than a page, you might want to break it apart into chunks of characters. So say go and summarize the first 2,000 characters and then the next 2,000 characters, and you may have several thousand characters on one page. You might have 5,000 characters. I don't know how many characters you'll have on a page, but the key thing is that if you go into a smaller unit like a character, you're subdividing. You could go beneath the page level. You may be able to do it on paragraphs depending on how the document is marked up. But you want to have some unit that you're going to work with. Now, when you break it apart into those units are going to be your sort of fundamental size pieces. So if you give a summary, you're going to get a summary of that size piece, or you're going to have to tell it to combine multiple pieces of that size. If you say 2,000 characters, you're going to get summaries and outlines or whatever it is of that size. If you do page, you're going to get it at the page level. Another example of how you can do this is you can think about other types of media like slides. So in this example, I've uploaded 120 slides for a PowerPoint presentation, and then I'm breaking the problem apart by telling it to read and summarize the key points on each slide. So what I'm doing is I'm giving it a unit of work, which is the slide, and you're going to go and within each slide do the summary. Now, if I told it to summarize the whole thing, it might work, but it's going to be harder to get all the information out. Because if you remember, one of the important pieces that we're typically trying to do is get information into the conversation so that we can reason about it. So if we start summarizing every page, it's easier for it to get the information in that we want, or if we're outlining each page. Now, one of the challenges with this is that if you look at what's happening here, it's going slide by slide, and then it stops because there's a limited amount of work that it wants to do at one time in the output, and there's a limited amount of work it can do in the output. So it gets to 5 slides and then it stops, and I have to ask it to proceed, and then it keeps going, and then I have to ask it to proceed, and finally we get through all of the different slides, and we can go and do something with it. But when you start breaking it down, it's also going to slow things down because it's going to have to go and look at each page incrementally. It's going to have to summarize or do whatever it is. And each of these things takes time and work to go and pull that data in to process it. Now, when you begin doing this, what you're going to want to do is tell it to do things in some increment. So we're going to go and break it apart into slides and do something to each slide. And then more than likely, we're going to have multiple iterations back and forth like we just saw, where it goes and does, say, 5 or 10 or 15 slides and then tells us, do you want me to proceed? And you say yes. And that's a really important thing to note, is once you start breaking it down, it is going to be more time consuming, especially if you go through and walk through the whole document. So one of the things we're going to have to think about, is there a better way of doing this? Do we have to read through the entire document to, do we have to break every page apart? Do we have to go and read every single page to accomplish the task that we want to accomplish?